Cape capsule. The accident has also jeopardized plans for next week's spacewalk to repair the station's damaged solar panels. Andrew Harding is at Mission Control in Moscow.
MIR is in deep trouble again, out of control and almost without power. On board, the 3 exhausted astronauts are safe for the moment, but if they can't repair MIR within 3 days, they'll have to abandon ship. At Mission Control, Russian officials snapped at the astronauts, calling MIR a kindergarten and accusing one of the crew members of making a simple error.
The crew unplugged one of the cables by mistake. They informed us immediately. Unfortunately, this cable turned out to be quite an important one.
That's putting it mildly. Now the Russians must race against the clock to set MIR back on course and restore power. Only then can they begin to repair the damage caused by last month's collision. The stress is clearly taking its toll on board the station. The commander, Vasily Tsibliev, is suffering from heart problems. The British-born Michael Foale is expected to stand in for him during some of the trickiest repair work. Help will soon be on the way, though. This morning, the next crew of MIR were given their final test at Russia's Star City. They insisted MIR was still safe, but they didn't hide their concerns. There are still too many unanswered questions, the commander said when I asked him how he felt. A French scientist is travelling on this mission too. He sounded more confident.
It's not dangerous. It's not dangerous. I think that if the repair is done, it will be as usual, just as usual.
Russian officials privately admit that MIR's problems could affect their international reputation and, of course, their international funding. NASA is already sounding the alarm bells.
These are very graphic lessons of what it takes, and some of the risks are being highlighted for us, but I think that we will be able to operate safer in the future because of it.
Tonight, though, the Russians insist they have things more or less under control. Some power and a measure of stability have now been restored to MIR. The Russians here are putting on a brave face again. In fact, they say it's all useful experience, but there must come a time when the risks of keeping astronauts on board MIR outweigh the benefits, and that point is moving closer. Andrew Harding, BBC News, at Mission Control outside Moscow.
Here, Kent police are questioning a man in his 30s about the murders of Lynn Russell and her daughter Megan a year ago. They were walking down a country lane when they were attacked. £1 a year. But the proposal has already provoked strong criticism. Our education correspondent Sue Littlemore reports.
Many students today, still enjoying a free university education, may come to regard themselves as the fortunate products of a very privileged time. In the last 2 decades, the number of young people going to university has increased threefold. Now about 1/3 of youngsters study for a degree. This massive expansion and the expectation it will have to continue have triggered the biggest review of our universities in 35 years. It's understood that the inquiry, led by Sir Ron Deering, will make more than 150 recommendations for the reform of higher education. Most controversial will be his support for the introduction of tuition fees for full-time undergraduates.
Having got their degree, they are more likely to be employed and they're much more likely to earn more money. So it's only fair, if there isn't more taxpayers' money to go into higher education, that they should be making a contribution to it.
It's estimated that a typical full-time undergraduate outside of London needs £4,500 a year in living costs, met by grants, loans and parental contributions. This leaves graduates with an average debt of just over £3,000. The typical annual cost for tuition is around £4,000. In future, students may have to take out loans of about £1,000 a year towards that. Some students are concerned tuition fees will deter many youngsters from entering higher education.
We believe that £1,000 a year would simply be the thin end of the wedge for students in this country. We don't want to see a situation like Australia or America where the kind of course you can participate on is based on your ability to earn rather than your ability to learn.
But advocates of fees argue students wouldn't be put off university as long as their loan repayments were spread over many years and were only triggered when a graduate's earnings crossed a certain threshold. The Secretary of State is expected to announce radical changes to universities when he responds to these recommendations next week. Privately, ministers say the issue of whether to introduce tuition fees has been one of the most difficult political decisions David Blunkett has ever had to make. Sue Littlemore, BBC News at the Department for Education.
Police in Miami are investigating reports that the man suspected of killing the fashion designer Gianni Versace might have carried out another murder in the city today. A man resembling Andrew Cunanan, who was seen running away from a building where a male doctor was found shot dead. Tonight, Gianni Versace's ashes are being carried back to Italy after he was cremated in a secret ceremony in Florida. A teenager jailed for life for murdering a policeman was released from prison tonight after his conviction was quashed. Philip English was in handcuffs and standing 100 yards away when his friend stabbed Sergeant Bill Forth in Gateshead in 1993. The decision to quash the sentence was made by the House of Lords. The reason will be given at a later date. Our Home Affairs correspondent Peter Gould reports.
As he left prison this evening, a free man, Philip English was asked what the past 4 years had been like.
Hard. What are you planning for tonight, Philip? Just be with your family.
It was in 1993 in Gateshead that the police were called to a disturbance on this housing estate. It ended with the death of Sergeant Bill Forth. He was beaten with sticks, then stabbed. Philip English was charged with murder, despite the fact that he was under arrest when his co-defendant, Paul Weddell, used a knife to inflict the fatal wounds. But at their trial, both young men were found guilty and sent away for life.
It's quashed, his conviction's been quashed.
Today's decision by the House of Lords to set him free followed a campaign by his family to prove that he'd been unfairly treated.
He's been in prison 4.5 years now for a murder he just didn't commit. And he's lost his adolescence. He was 15 when he went to jail and he's 20 now. And I just hope that he can start his life all over again.
The widow of Sergeant Forth was also at the House of Lords to hear the judgment. Her emotions very different.
I'm devastated. It was completely unexpected and I need to find out the reasons why.
The Lords will explain the reasons for their decision later, but it's thought this judgment will have implications for other cases where there have been similar arguments.
In the 50s, Derek Bentley was found guilty of murdering a policeman and hanged, even though he was under arrest when Christopher Craig fired the gun. Bentley was also judged to have been part of what the law describes as a joint enterprise. But after the release of Philip English, the courts may now have to take a different view of such cases. Peter Gould, BBC News.
The Ulster Unionist leader David Trimble has said